and welcome to another episode of End the Lie Radio here on UCY.tv, and of course my website is endthelie.com, and you can scroll down to the bottom there of the homepage, and there are plenty of links to our various presences on social networks and whatnot. But today we have an exciting episode for you. We have another guest, Dane Wigington. He features prominently in Why in the World Are They Spraying, and you can check that out at whyintheworldaretheyspraying.com. We highly recommend you pick up that DVD. And he's also affiliated with GeoEngineeringWatch.org, which keeps tabs on these issues surrounding geoengineering, especially stratospheric aerosol geoengineering.
Thank you very much for having me back on the show, Madison, and again, thank you for helping to address this most dire issue that most are unaware of. To give some of the listeners a background on who I am and how I got into this issue, I have a background in renewable energy. I worked for Bechtel Power Corporation, which is a four-letter word now, certainly, but I worked on one of the first commercial solar plants in the continental U.S. My home was on the cover of the world's largest renewable energy magazine. I live in the Pacific Northwest. I moved here specifically to try to get into clean air. And since we're on the side of the Pacific that incoming storms flow through, I felt this would be such an area. But in fact, after moving here into the middle of the wilderness and shortly after completing construction, losing 50, 60, 70, sometimes 80% of my solar power uptake from whatever aircraft were emitting in the skies above on sporadic days, I began to do research to try to find out what this might be, and quickly came to the subject of geoengineering. Two acronyms describe this, these programs we see in the sky: SRM, which is Solar Radiation Management, and SAG, which is Stratospheric Aerosol Geoengineering. I was really astounded to find mountains of data on these programs that media does not cover in any way, shape, or form. And I began to do water testing with single storm events as they came through. From initial water test, Madison, of 7 parts per billion, which was already high for aluminum, and incidentally, that's a primary ingredient named in geoengineering patents. Within 6 years, I had single rain event water tests that were up to 3,450 parts per billion. So the rain is literally toxic. And these programs are decimating the atmosphere from top to bottom. And an issue that I wanted to address in the show, which appears to have in large part been triggered by the geoengineering programs, is methane mass expulsion. And these programs of spraying in our skies, in addition to toxifying everything on the ground, they shred ozone. When you shred the ozone layer, much more of the sun's thermal energy penetrates into land surface areas, into deeper depths of the ocean. And in fact, what's happening right now on the East Siberian shelf of the Arctic is a mass methane release. Media is not covering this. They're trying to hide this. And again, geoengineering appears to be a major causal factor in this occurring. This is methane hydrate releases. Methane hydrate is stored methane on the sea floor. And as the ozone layer is shredded, and it's quite shredded over the northern hemisphere, and I stress to people, this is not the southern hemisphere hole we've heard about for decades, but this is a new northern hemisphere hole. Canadian government is threatening to fire Canadian researchers that are part of this research team. They don't want this word to get out. But as the ozone is shredded and UV penetrates deeper into the sea floor, it helps to thaw methane hydrates. This has been happening around the globe for decades due to human activity and warming oceans. I mean, again, geoengineering has been going on for 60 plus years, so we know that the damage they've been doing is at least for that long. So this methane releases that are happening, for example, the Bermuda Triangle when ships sink, this is methane release. Whole fields release it once, aerates the ocean like a bottle of champagne. The ship has no buoyancy and goes straight to the bottom intact. So this has been happening for a very, very long time. But now On the East Siberian shelf of the Arctic, we appear to be having massive release. The way we know this release is happening on the East Siberian shelf is because the latest data comes from Russian research vessels that have monitored plumes of methane from the seafloor a kilometer wide, and they're seeing thousands of these plumes. And an additional way we know that it's saturating the atmosphere, the upper layers of the atmosphere, the mesosphere, is from satellite methane imagery. And we see now on that imagery, Madison, that methane is indeed saturating clear into the southern hemisphere from the northern hemisphere. And again, the ramifications of this issue cannot be overstated, and mainstream media simply is not covering this. And the degree of impact on the globe is absolutely, it will be catastrophic based on all available data. Some of the effects are quite accurately predicted. So this methane event is a global game changer by itself, with the amount of quantity of methane we know to be in this particular reservoir, which in turn will trigger further positive feedback loop, additional warming, which triggers other methane pockets to begin releasing as well. So this is quite a vicious cycle. And as the ice is lost from warming from the shredded ozone layer as well, which again traces back to geoengineering, then it feeds this climate mechanism even further. The ice loses its albedo, which is its reflectivity. So instead of 90+% of the sun's thermal energy being reflected back to space, 90+% is absorbed into the darker and more absorbent ocean. So this is really a runaway event at this point in time. To put this into context, Madison, with how much methane is thought to be in this reservoir in the East Siberian shelf, it's 10,000 gigatons. And if only 60 of that 10,000 releases, that would be a 400% increase in the greenhouse gases that we've already put into the atmosphere. So you can try to get your arms around if the totality of that reservoir release is what we're facing. And the problem with methane is it is many times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. And although most science data refers to methane as being 20 times more potent than CO2, that's over a 100-year time horizon. Over a 10-year time horizon, methane is over 100 times more potent a greenhouse gas than CO2. And again, people need to understand what this does. It's like putting a layer of glass over the planet. The sun's thermal energy comes in, but it doesn't go back out. So it builds, just like your car sitting outside in the sun on a hot day. And quite simply, this is a global game-changing event. It appears to have been triggered. Geoengineering appears to be, we believe, one of the major causal factors. Even though it's being sold to us as a remedy for this, all available data indicates that it's anything but.
Wow. I mean, that, I want people to realize that this is not some kind of doom and gloom just for the sake of scaring you into buying a product or something. This is genuine information that we truly need to pay attention to, or else, the worst case scenario will occur. And before we started on the call, you were mentioning that the so-called geoengineers are kind of scrambling due to this problem and the danger that it poses. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, Madison. I mean, this is absolutely grabbing at straws where they're at now. And in the worst-case scenario at this point, far worst-case scenario than what anybody has seen data-wise so far, is what's playing out, and all available data indicates there is no putting this genie back in the bottle. So the latest proposals from geoengineers and scientists from the front lines are, one, they're putting out a global call to any scientist that will try to assist in this effort at finding a solution for what they deem an impossible situation. And two proposals that I've seen so far, and this should give an indication of just how far these guys are reaching for some sort of solution, is 1,000-ton sheets of plastic with 200-ton stainless steel frames, which would encompass an area of 4 square kilometers to set on the sea floor to hold this methane down. Now, simple logic would say that's not going to work. Methane is buoyant. It's going to float any such device to the surface. So, I mean, these guys really seem to be reaching. And again, we should keep in mind, these are some of the same scientists like Ken Caldera that have been pushing geoengineering for a great many years. Geoengineering that has been going on for, we believe, at least 6 decades. And these guys pushing it as if it hasn't happened yet, and it's going to be a cure for this problem that we now face that geoengineering appears to be a cause of. A primary cause, not a single cause, but a primary cause of. Another solution that the geoengineers have recently proposed, and this can be found online as well, or on geoengineeringwatch.org, they've proposed using the HARP facilities. Many people have heard what that is, High Altitude Auroral Research Project, which is basically a massively powerful antenna array complex. There's one in Alaska. We believe there's 18 around the globe, and these massively high-powered low-frequency radio antennas can heat the atmosphere. I mean, this is stated data. Jesse Ventura covered this on one of his shows, I believe. But they're proposing to, with different frequencies from each array, to basically nuke the atmosphere with these high powerful antennas, with the consequences unknown completely, in a desperate attempt to try to degrade the methane that is now saturating the atmosphere. So they are as desperate as they can be, and for a good a good justification here, because these methane expulsions have happened twice, Madison, in the last 300 million years that we know of, based on paleoclimatic data. The end of the Permian era, 255 million years ago, methane mass extinction, 70% terrestrial land extinction, 94% ocean extinction. Same event happened again, Paleocene, Eocene, 55 million years ago. Again, global extinction. So we're talking about a global game-changing event that's on top of all the damage we've already done to the planet and that geoengineering is doing by the day. So this is something that people, whether they like it or not, whether they believe it or not, they will hear about this very soon, because there won't be any hiding this for long.
And let me get this straight. They are actually proposing to continue what they are doing, thinking that this will somehow negate all the negative effects of geoengineering, or are they proposing a slightly different kind of geoengineering, or what's the deal with that? Because I'm just amazed that anyone could think, oh, hey, let's just continue doing the same thing that has contributed to this situation, and somehow it will right the problem. I mean, what is the rationale behind that? Well,
as many have heard the saying, that's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And that's certainly what we have. Now, in the case of the geoengineers like David Keith, like Ken Caldera, from what we've seen of these people, certainly they don't appear sane to us. And they are taking the approach that geoengineering has not happened yet, even though it has indisputably been going on for 60-plus years. And they are trying to sell this as some last-minute mitigation for this methane mass expulsion. Now, we found a document recently, Madison, in the NASA archives from 1966, 80 pages long, fully outlining the existence of U.S. weather modification programs at that time. This is a government document, and they had budgets in the hundreds of millions of dollars in 1966, and they referred in that document to programs going back at least as far as 1956. So clearly there was a massive apparatus set up going back that far. There was much discussion of the coming expansion of these programs at that time. And this is something that should be of interest to people as well, because there appears to have been, even at the height of the Cold War, collusion between global competing powers like the U.S. and the USSR. We found another government document, which is also posted on geoengineeringwatch.org, 1968, photographs of the Russian weather modification scientists touring the U.S. and examining the U.S. weather modification facilities. this stuff's been going on in plain sight for a very long time, but mainstream media does not report on it for obvious reasons. Most people would be naturally adverse to being sprayed like a rat with chemicals, some known and some unknown, and also adverse to somebody completely hampering the Earth's natural systems. So we have no way now of knowing how much better position we would be in if these programs had not been going on with no oversight, no regulation whatsoever for 6 decades or more. But now, at this point, we know for sure, based on available data, that we are going to face challenges that are unimaginable to most.
And I think what's especially interesting is the military's concern surrounding this. You know, it's clearly a concern for the military, as you outline over at geoengineeringwatch.org. I was just looking at some of these documents, and it really is overwhelming, the amount of documents that have been put out. And just in 2009, I saw a New York Times report about climate change seen as a threat to U.S. security, and this is obviously coming out of the Pentagon. So what exactly is the military's involvement in this? Are they just writing papers on it, and that's their level of concern, or do you think they're currently taking an active role in this push to fight against the effects, potentially by using the same methods that contributed to the problem that we're seeing right now? What is the military's role in this situation?
Certainly, I think it's undeniable that the military has to be at the head of these programs. I mean, the scope and scale of them alone could not be accomplished any other way. And again, we have documents showing the military's constant interest in the climate going back a very long way. Going back to 2004, a representative from the Pentagon stated to Forbes magazine that climate change was indeed the greatest threat facing U.S. security. But mainstream media in general does not cover this. And certainly the ramifications are huge. And when you have a guy like Al Gore who comes out and muddies the water with his clearly hypocritical position on this issue, it muddied the water tremendously. But what I would encourage people to keep in mind, the medical industry exists to capitalize off death and suffering. But that doesn't mean death and suffering isn't happening, and the same is true with the climate. In regard to the military's concern here, their concern is obvious. One, what people don't understand with sea level rise, let's take that issue by itself, and acidification of the ocean. Now, back to the methane release, Madison. The methane, as it travels from the sea floor to the surface, much of that is dissolved into the ocean. That acidifies the ocean. The ocean is acidifying at this point in time at a rate that's probably several thousand times faster than anything since the previous methane mass expulsion. It's acidifying at an absolutely radical rate. So you have the methane hitting the atmosphere. You have a planet that we could see the latest data from some of the frontline scientists point toward a temperature rise on the planet of perhaps 10 degrees or more in the next few years. That's very hard to get your arms around. It's radically worse than any climate model. And again, this looks like a fairly certain scenario. I mean, it's already happening. We've set in this year alone in the continental U.S., we've set some 60,000 high temperature records, and that's in spite of the fact that the National Weather Service and NOAA are more or less cheating on the temperature readings. The method they use to take those readings now lowers the high temp reading 2 to 3 degrees over the actual temperature on the ground. So it appears every measure is being taken to mask the gravity of our situation. Because if the Greenland ice sheet melts, that would raise sea levels 21 to 24 feet, depends on the data you look at. If the full Antarctic sheet melts, that's another 197 feet. Now, that's not going to happen overnight. It takes time for that ice to melt no matter what, but this is not a linear equation. That's what people need to understand. All the climate science is wrong. It's all radically wrong. None of the science organizations, even the IPCC, the world's largest scientific panel ever assembled, 2,000 plus climatologists, their data is horrifically wrong. They put no consideration on climate feedback mechanisms, and simply their purpose was to hide the gravity of our situation. But now it can't be hidden much longer. So the military's purpose, back to your original question, the sort of cataclysmic events that this methane expulsion alone will trigger are global game-changing events, and yet they continue to spray ever more in an attempt to stop something that the spraying, the geoengineering, stratospheric aerosol geoengineering, appears to have been a major causal factor in triggering to begin with.
And you mentioned ocean acidification. I recently watched a report coming out of Japan about the waters surrounding Japan showing really dangerous levels of acidification. Is this all related? And what exactly are the long-term consequences of something like this? Are we talking about even greater die-off of marine life, and what really would be the consequences of that if that is what is going on right now?
I'm not familiar with any study from Japan. I don't doubt what you saw, and the ocean currents are carrying this more acidified water around the globe already. So certainly that is likely connected, and there are methane releases happening at many other locations around the globe. This was just covered, and people can research anything I'm saying. I don't want anyone to take my word on any of these issues. I want them to research. There's methane now being released along the U.S. eastern seaboard. Again, there's methane pockets around the globe that have been stored for a very long time, as the climate has had the equilibrium it's had for a very long time. But now that's been disrupted, and so now these methane releases are happening everywhere. It happens to be a particularly large release in the Arctic, but there could be a methane release off the coast of Japan. How the acidification damages marine life. You have crustaceans that can no longer form adequate shells because the alkalinity of the water is gone. And people don't think it's much of a change from 8.3, the ocean's proper state of alkalinity, to 8.2. That's a massive change. The pH scale is like a Richter scale. A full number on that scale is a magnitude of 10. So 1 point from 8.3 to 8.2 is 100% difference. It's a huge difference. So the acidification of the ocean, again, in previous events, Madison, like the Paleocene, Eocene, 55 million years ago, 94% ocean extinction. Now you add to that things like the Macondo well that happened in the Gulf. You add the overfishing, you add the pollution, you add the radiation. I mean, fish stocks are crashing right now. I believe the last data I saw on global pelagic fish populations was something like a 92 or 3% depletion. So we are hitting the wall on a great many issues, but what leading this back to geoengineering, because that is the thrust of what I'm trying to expose here. In previous methane events, although you had mass extinction, you didn't have a complete extinction of life on Earth. If you add the geoengineering, which is shredding our ozone layer, the science is very clear on that, particulates in the atmosphere shred ozone, it's completely decimating the Earth's hydrological cycle. That's why we see the massive droughts everywhere. And what this does, it stops the planet from responding to to the damage that's been done to it. By stopping the hydrological cycle, we have massive droughts over all the Earth's boreal forests. So we have record forest fires, which adds to the gases in the atmosphere and depletes from the Earth's ability to absorb this carbon. So you understand, in doing so, the Earth's natural cycles, instead of absorbing carbon, it starts to expel carbon. Does that make sense?
Yes, and obviously we have to take into account the fact that while these surges of natural levels of greenhouse gases and whatnot have occurred in the past, human beings weren't engaging in global geoengineering campaigns. Obviously, we also didn't have the industrial output, and we didn't have, as you were saying, overfishing and all of these problems. Massive deforestation, strip mining and stuff like that, where we don't have the natural feedback loop that absorbs so much of this. We're just exacerbating the problem, and obviously it is much more significant. I brought up an article here from the Japan Times, and one thing that I think is interesting is that you seem to be focusing on methane, and that seems to be nearly non-existent in the conversation surrounding climate change and these issues in terms of the mainstream media and all these various reports that we're hearing. It's always CO2, CO2, CO2. But as you were saying, here's the Japan Times. They say of the 4 episodes in the past, the closest analog for the present is what happened some 56 million years ago, a period known as the Paleo-Eocene thermal maximum, when oceans changed fast but not nearly as fast as today. I think that's very important. And the scientific review suggests that the acidification is now happening at least 10 times more quickly than during the Paleo-Eocene thermal maximum, raising the possibility that we are entering an unknown territory of marine ecosystem change. And I would like to ask you, is that a little bit of an understatement? Would you say we're talking about unknown territory of ecosystem change, not just marine, but global ecosystem change?
Yes, your assessment is exactly correct. I mean, it is a horrific understatement of the gravity of the situation that we face. And again, this holds true for all the climate modeling. It's all wrong, and many people would agree on that. But what they would not agree on, or what they don't realize, is that it's all wrong in one direction. All the climate modeling, even the worst case scenario modeling we've seen, is radically, radically short of what's actually unfolding on the ground. And again, they don't acknowledge the methane issue. They don't talk about the methane issue, nor do they talk about the incredibly massive elephant in the room, which is geoengineering. That we literally almost never see blue skies anymore. All you see is these horrific science fiction looking patterns in the sky of clearly what's particulate disbursement. And on that note, to redefine for people what a naturally occurring condensation trail is. A condensation trail, according to NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, according to their original data on a naturally occurring vapor trail, 70% humidity and 70 degrees below zero. Now, they have since changed the science on that because they try to make the science match what we see in the sky. However inaccurate that is, it's what we see is a particulate trail, not a condensation trail. But just like with the nuclear issue, when there's too much radiation in the air, what do? They change the safe standard. They raise it by 10,000%. Now all of a sudden we're all safe again because the safe standard just got raised through the roof. Same thing with condensation trail data. So they lie about the conditions necessary. They try to match the science with the particulate trails that we see so that we think it's natural. It's not. When you walk down the street on a cold day and your breath leaves a fog, you don't walk a mile down the street and look behind you and see some kind of a hanging trail in the air for a mile behind you. The same is true with a jet vapor trail. If it's a natural trail, it will dissipate almost immediately. It's almost transparent, and it would only be at the highest altitudes at the coldest time of year in some of the coldest places on the planet. What we see almost without exception, even the trails that appear to dissipate that are maybe 4 or 5 miles long, it's still a particulate trail. It's just another form of disbursement. We can't know all the different forms, but plain and simply, almost without exception, especially in the lower 48, when you see a trail of any length or brightness, you're seeing a particulate trail. It's important for people to understand that. So with these programs going on, Madison, that are completely thwarting the Earth's natural cycles, they're not talked about. Just like what you mentioned earlier, the methane issue, not talked about. Out of sight, out of mind. So these massive elephants in the room are about to start stepping on all of us, and there won't be any hiding this for much longer.
And why exactly, in your opinion, is particularly the methane issue ignored or pushed out of the dialogue? Well, one thing I think it's quite obvious why geoengineering is not mentioned because if it is even pointed out, I think people would be up in arms just because it is so obvious. Once you're aware of it, it's painful really to look in the skies, and most days you will see at least 5 trails. And as you said, these are very, very clearly not condensation trails. You can watch condensation trails being created. It'll usually be, just if we're talking scale here, looking up into the sky, it only looks like it's an inch or two long behind this small jet that you'll see very, very high up. But when you're seeing these lower jets and trails going across the entire horizon, it is very obvious what they are. But in your opinion, why is it that methane specifically, and these issues that you're talking about, mass expulsion, why is this being ignored? It seems like, if they are legitimately concerned about climate change, they would be ringing alarms all day long about this. Why are they not?
Because they know that there is nothing that can put this genie back in the bottle. Nothing. There is no stopping what's been triggered. And they are simply trying to hide it as long as they can. And that won't be much longer. The speed at which methane changes the biosphere is absolutely blinding. And so the only thing the military-industrial complex knows how to do is to heap insanity on top of insanity, which is to spray more and more and more, even though we have 6 decades of this that appear clearly to have contributed massively to the dire situation that we are in now, and certainly more is only going to make it worse. We are being painted completely into a corner. And back to what's happening with the Earth's natural systems if they were not doing this. You have a bioavailable metal solution in the rain, aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, and what else we don't know, that is absolutely toxic to almost all organisms on the ground. It's sterilizing the ground, literally. In Northern California, and I know U.S. Forest Service biologists, again, and people with the organic farmer co-op here, everybody's having great difficulty growing much of anything because the soil has been laden with this toxic brew. Aluminum specifically, a lot of study done on this and its effect in the soils. So in relation to the forest and the burning of the forest, you have forests that are in decline everywhere. And anybody can look this up. Again, I don't want anybody to take my word for it. Australia's forests are literally imploding. Same with the northern latitude forests. These are the lungs of the planet. So you have the soils being toxified, and the organisms sense this toxin in the root system, and they shut down nutrient uptake. So the trees stop taking up nutrients. They die slowly. Yes, the beetles move in after, but that's a symptom, not the cause. So you have trees that are dying. You have a massively droughted out planet because the particulates, the science, again, is very clear in this. I started to outline this earlier. The known effects of geoengineering: shredded ozone layer, greatly reduced rainfall, toxified soils, altered wind patterns. I mean, there's nothing it doesn't negatively affect. So you have a forest that's being burnt by the sun because of the shredded ozone. The roots are being poisoned. There's no water falling on it. And now you have loads of dry lightning, Madison, because they more or less disperse the rain from any storms to a large degree. Yes, there's deluges here and there where the water all wads up and comes down in one spot. But you have a lot more dry lightning in a forest that's drier than any historical norm. So you have massive forest fires burning everywhere, and you have, again, carbon expelling from the planet now instead of being absorbed. So all this feeds into this feedback loop, and you add the methane on top, and simply speaking, I mean, we are headed at light speed into completely unknown territory. And if the geoengineering does not stop, I think our future is bleak indeed.
And one thing I noticed on geoengineeringwatch.org, and this is something I'm totally unfamiliar with, so I'm hoping you can explain this a little bit for me and our listeners as well. One of the symptoms or the known consequences of these global geoengineering programs you have listed here, actually right below the dry lightning strikes, which we are indeed seeing a significant increase of, is possible triggering of climate feedback loops like methane hydrate and clathrate releases. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, again, now methane hydrates are on the seafloor, clathrates are in the tundra, and so as a feedback mechanism that geoengineering again causes, as you're shredding the ozone layer, you have more of the sun's thermal radiations, thermal energy coming through, and that penetrates deeper into anything. That's why many people have noticed how hot the sun feels on their face, even this time of year. It's very intense because the ozone layer indeed is shredded. We're seeing bark burnt off the south side of trees, native trees. I mean, this has never happened before. If you touch your car, a metal surface, and even though the outside temperature might not feel so hot, surfaces are much warmer. This is again due to the thermal energy that's coming through this shredded ozone. Now, let's take the ice cap. And this is of huge importance. People are very confused about what's happening with the ice caps. They hear that Antarctica is growing, and even though the Arctic is shrinking. Antarctica is growing only on one little tiny patch of sea ice, and indeed that's happening because of warming, not cooling, because there's areas of evaporation and changed wind now in the Arctic, and so it's snowing in areas where it has not had any precipitation for, in some cases, hundreds of years. The land-based ice is absolutely melting. There's only one small patch of sea ice that's gaining, and that's what's confusing people because the media uses it to confuse people. Ice around the globe, the cryosphere, is imploding. The Arctic ice this year, the Arctic, almost collapsed. It's 1/5 of its mass from 20 years ago. Arctic ice was being lost. I'm getting back to the geoengineering feedback loops here, Madison, but this is part of that. Arctic ice was being lost this year at the end of the melt season at 130,000 square kilometers a day of surface area disappearing, 130,000 a day. As that disappears, you have now a more intense UV from the sun because of the shredded ozone layer because of geoengineering. That penetrates deeper into the ocean as that ice is lost, heats the seafloor, and releases the methane. And that's one of the mechanisms, to answer your question, how geoengineering fuels this cycle. And although geoengineering can and does cause large-scale regional cooling, they can do amazing things. They appear to be ice nucleating much of the moisture, which is something I'll get into in a minute, which cools the air chemically. But it comes at the cost of a much worsened overall warming. It's robbing Peter to pay Paul at massive expense to all that lives. So this is one of the mechanisms by which they've triggered these feedback loops. And again, the methane situation alone, once the Arctic ice cap is gone, we believe now that will happen in the next 2 to 3 years. And for people who think this is a natural cycle, it has not happened. We have not had an ice-free Arctic for at least 3 million years, and probably as long as 13 million years. It's not a coincidence that it happened right now. It's not a coincidence that it's happened after 6 decades of geoengineering. This is human activity causing this. Geoengineering is human activity. And not to say that we haven't damaged the planet with all the other things we've done to it, we have. But geoengineering is the single biggest decimating factor on the planet, period.
Before you move on a little bit with this very important information, I want to ask you if you're familiar with the group, the Heartland Institute, and specifically an individual named James Taylor. He's the managing editor of Environment and Climate News, and I ask that because he put out an article on Forbes called "Antarctic Sea Ice Sets Another Record," and this was published in September, and he makes some very sweeping statements here, to say the least. He says the new data also adds context to sensationalist media stories about declining ice in small portions of Antarctica, such as portions of West Antarctica and the Antarctic Peninsula. The mainstream media frequently publish stories focusing on ice loss in these two areas, yet the media stories rarely, if ever, mention that ice is accumulating over the larger area of East Antarctica, and the continent as a whole is gaining snow and ice mass. What is your take on that, and are you familiar with the Heartland Institute or this guy, James Taylor, and Environment and Climate News?
I'm not familiar with him. I'm not familiar with that institute. When he says that there is an area of sea ice that's gaining surface area, he is correct. When he says that the land-based ice in Antarctica is also gaining mass, he's incorrect. He is absolutely wrong. There is no data to support that. You have ice sheets on other parts of Antarctica that are indeed collapsing, and the cryosphere as a whole is collapsing. And people, I would encourage them to watch a documentary that's about to come out called Chasing Ice. It was, I think, 3 years in the making, and it shows quite indisputably the massive retreat of ice around the globe, period, with the exception of one small area in Antarctic that is caused by changing wind patterns that is caused largely by geoengineering. And in regard to geoengineering, and this is where the equation really needs to be clear to people, anything they see happening, like what's happening in Antarctica, if there's any gain in ice, you can attribute that in one form or another to geoengineering, period. If geoengineering was not happening right now and the skies cleared, people would not have any doubt about the warming state our planet is in within weeks. And again, I'm not stating geoengineering is a cure here. It's not. It's putting a toxic Band-Aid on that every day they do it, even though they can create cooler areas, they can create snow out of what should have been a rainstorm. This is called artificial ice nucleation. I'll talk about this next. So they can create a cooling event and perhaps add to this ice situation in Antarctica in one small spot. If they focus all their energy on one small spot, they can do some miraculous things. But again, it comes at the cost of a radically worse situation overall. And in the best science data on the Antarctic ice, Madison, there's a shredded ozone hole over the Antarctic. We know that. We've known that for decades. We believe that's from geoengineering, not from aerosol spray cans. I mean, what is more likely? Fleets of jets dumping 100-ton payloads of toxic particulates in the atmosphere that causes horrific chemical damage, or a hairspray can? I mean, which is the most likely cause? We have science on geoengineering. We know that the particulates cause this damage. We believe the ozone hole in Antarctica is from geoengineering, which has changed the wind patterns, which is now blowing across the land ice and out over the ocean, bringing precipitation, snow, where there was none historically. That's the cause of that small increase. So, again, people need to look at the whole picture. They need to look at the whole picture and realize that there is almost nothing natural in our weather at this point because of the geoengineering. And do you know anything about artificial ice nucleation, Madison? Have we talked about that before?
No, we haven't. We talked a little bit about a similar issue dealing with rain in the last episode, but we haven't covered that. But from what I understand from what you're saying, it really sounds like we're talking about the equivalent of someone having, a massive gunshot wound and a doctor saying, "Here, put on this Band-Aid and pretend it's all better." Is that really, the equivalent of what we're seeing with these attempts to increase ice levels in tiny little areas in an effort to make it look better?
Yes. That's exactly right. And if they're able to create one little expansion somewhere, then that's the focus all of a sudden of institutions that are almost exclusively paid for by the hydrocarbon industry, and they have very benign sounding names.
Heartland Institute is precisely that, by the way. They're out of this world. But if anyone wants to find out more about them, just go to sourcewatch.org, and search the Heartland Institute. I mean, it's one of the longer articles on SourceWatch, and I mean, they're identified as a front for the hydrocarbon industry, coal specifically. They're part of ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. They've also done some hilarious attempts to undermine science relating to tobacco. And essentially, I mean, they're identified as a front group by SourceWatch, and SourceWatch's research tends to be of a very, very high degree of accuracy, and everything's sourced. So if people really want to find out about like the people who are putting out this supposed facts about the Antarctic sea ice setting another record, and this guy James Taylor, who they identify by name in this article, actually, you'll be quite surprised. I mean, they put out billboards. They have a picture here, a billboard that's got a mugshot of Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and it says, "I still believe in global warming. Do you? Heartland.org." I mean, that's the type of propaganda they put out. And the Heartland Institute president said the ad was, quote, rigorously accurate, unquote. So this is a level at which these people operate, because it seems to me that they just can't address the facts. Is that the case?
That is the case. Thank you for answering that question so concisely. I was not familiar with exactly who that group is, but I am very familiar with the scenario. It's exactly what you outlined. They pick some very environmentally sounding name and put out some report that has no basis to it if it's looked at in a bigger picture context. So, yeah, this fits the scenario perfectly. That's exactly what I would have expected. You knew a lot more about it than I did, that particular group. But that is absolutely the case. The planet is in meltdown period. There won't be any denying that for long. Geoengineering, again, appears to be the largest single causal factor. We've definitely been hard on our planet. There's no question about that from many different directions. But geoengineering, the single biggest environmentally decimating factor, period. And then on the ice nucleation, Madison, to add, to dovetail on what we're speaking about, people can, again, verify everything I'm saying. You can look up Chinese create snowstorms. Chinese openly announced they were ice nucleating storms. What this is changing what should have been a rainstorm into a snowstorm. This is done with chemicals and positively charged particles, which causes ice to nucleate at far above freezing temperatures. Again, for people who don't think this is possible, it's like the first aid kit on your shelf. It sits there 20 years. You mix that ice pack chemicals together and you have ice. That's exactly what they're doing in the clouds with chemicals known and unknown, doing damage we can only speculate on. So what we're seeing now in the Weather Channel and all the other weather agencies, which again are owned by, in one form or another, by the same people involved with the geoengineering programs, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin. Those are the people who own, and the Rothschilds, by the way, we just did an article on geoengineeringwatch.org. Rothschilds own the largest weather graphics corporation on the planet. So they control the graphics, they control the forecast, and they're the ones that can say it's normal to snow at 45 degrees or 50 degrees. We see this fall. We've seen this in Salt Lake City, Denver, snowflakes at 45 degrees, 48, 49, 50 degrees, and they refer to it as heavy wet snow, heavy wet snow. This is not a natural snow. It's an ice nucleated snow. It's massive flakes, look like cotton candy. They come down, it decimates trees, it sticks like cement. It's absolutely not real. It's not natural snow, I should say. And this is what they're doing. This is some of the desperation that they're doing to try to create the semblance of winter, to try to hide the magnitude of what's already happening on the ground. Trees are not losing their leaves. Indeed, in Northern California, we have deciduous trees and shrubs here that have not lost their leaves for 3 years. This is happening already on the ground, and they are doing everything they can to try to hide this with no regard for the toxicness of what they are doing, the long-term ramifications, no regard at all. It's simply hide it from the public as long as possible.
Well, I want to point out to people, this is the kind of stuff that I don't look into until someone like you spurs me into doing it, and I applaud you for that. But the Weather Channel was actually acquired in 2008 by NBC Universal Bain Capital, get that, folks, Comcast, GE, and the Blackstone Group. And of course, if anyone is involved in a program like this, I think it would be guaranteed that it would be a company like GE. And if there is any investment group investing in this type of stuff, it would be Bain Capital. I mean, that's talk about the lowest of the low. But excuse me. I'm really fascinated by the interest, the mention rather of the Rothschilds' involvement in this. And folks, if you want to check out these articles, it's geoengineeringwatch.org. Geoengineeringwatch.org. They have a ton of information up there, and I also see a video called "Don't Eat the Snow," and I have a sinking feeling that it's kind of related to what we're talking about here. So I want you to address that as well if you can. But how are the Rothschilds playing into this? And is it anything beyond the graphics company that you mentioned?
Certainly, they seem to have their fingers into most major corporations, especially on the defense industry line. And again, it's imperative for those that are involved with global weather modification programs to also control the forecasting, the forecasters, and the modeling, so that all the dots look like they all fit together. And so they can have meteorologists, if they really deserve to be called that, for example, in the Weather Channel, spending 4 or 5 minutes, as I saw the other night, trying to explain to the viewers how it can snow at 45 degrees. And so they will disseminate whatever information they're told, and that's why it's imperative that, again, these same companies that are involved in the weather modification have to own the weather forecasting entities like Weather Channel and the graphics, so the graphics match. And in fact, when we see the term mostly sunny generally means you'll have a sky full of spray the next day. It almost invariably means that. So they start these new terms like heavy wet snow, mostly sunny, and we look up and see these dirty, dingy, toxic, line-filled skies with particulates that are absolutely, positively falling on us. This is not speculation. I mean, we have, again, from the Pacific Northwest alone, 100 or so lab tests from the state-certified lab. I mean, there's a mountain of metal raining down on us. We have patents for this stuff. On GeoEngineering Watch, we have about 150 patents posted. There's patents, as I just referred to, the artificial ice nucleation. We have patents for that, one from NASA. I mean, we're not making this stuff up, and so it's imperative for those global elite who are clearly in this up to their eyeballs, who are only trying to preserve their own power, and they, again, can only be considered clinically insane. And if one looks at psychoanalysis of those in power, and we have looked at, there was 2 good studies done, and they all have various forms of psychosis, but the common thread is a lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. Because people ask this question all the time, Madison, why would they do this? If it's toxic, if it's tearing the atmosphere apart, if it's poisoning everything on the ground, why would they do it? People have to ask themselves, why would the same global elite detonate 1,800 plus nuclear weapons on the planet like it's some big game, toxifying everything with strontium-90? Why would they do that? There's no sanity in this equation. You can't reason with these people, and they simply are not sane. It's that simple.
Yes, it's total psychopathy, really, when it comes down to it, or sociopathy would be the more accurate term in terms of modern psychological lingo, because they really have no moral compass whatsoever. And when it comes down to it, it's just no system of ethics. It is total disregard for other people's lives, other people's existence, future generations, and so on. And in this article, the Rothschilds and the geoengineering empire released about midway through November of this year. I mean, you provide just the the Business Wire press release here talking about E.L. Rothschild LLC, a private investment company led by Chairman Sir Evelyn de Rothschild and CEO Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, announcing the signing of a definitive agreement to acquire a 70% interest in Weather Central LP. And of course, that is the graphics company you mentioned. But I see also here they also provide data services for television, web, and mobile. So is this tying in not only providing graphics but also skewed data in order to essentially cover up or minimize the real problem and the real danger that this type of geoengineering programs pose?
Absolutely. Everything you outlined is exactly right. If you had independent meteorological forecasting agencies and you had meteorologists that could say what they really thought, this facade would not hold up for long. When you have hurricanes like Hurricane Sandy, which, by the way, we absolutely believe to have been steered, that brought in snow. I mean, hurricanes that deliver snow, it's absolutely unheard of. And even though it collided with a cold front, snow was falling in some of those regions at 45 degrees. That simply does not work with the laws of physics unless you have elements that don't belong, like artificial chemical ice nucleators. And again, we have the patents. We have former examples from China. China, in fact, nucleated 3 snowstorms over Beijing. The first 2 they admitted to openly with their Bureau of Weather Modification. The third one did $1 billion worth of damage, and they shut up at that time and went back underground. These programs are absolutely going on. And as you outlined, the involvement of Evelyn de Rothschilds and the rest of the global elite, they are absolutely involved with these programs, and they must control the weather entities. Even the Weather Underground, which is another weather modeling entity, has been acquired also. They're basically all bought up, just like the mainstream media, so that the weather forecasting entities, all of them, are controlled, again, by the same people who are doing the weather modeling. And to point out, to back this up, Raytheon does all the weather modeling for the National Weather Service and NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Lockheed Martin does it for the FAA. So you have the foxes not just in the hen house, but running the hen house.
Well, I don't think it could really get more disturbing than that. And in the next hour here, we're going to take a break here. I really want to get into some of the other proposals that they have put forward other than these insane ideas, massive plastic sheets and stuff like this. I want to get into a little bit these proposals surrounding HARP and how HARP and geoengineering tie together, because I know it's something that's very little understood. HARP, I mean, because it is extremely mysterious. We know very little about it. And I also, too, want to get into a little bit more how this information is being consolidated so they do have control over all of the meteorological data and all of the climate data that we are being fed in order to give us a highly skewed view. But everyone, you are listening to End the Lie Radio. I'm your host, Madison Rupert, and today our guest is the phenomenally informed Dane Wigington, and the websites for him to check out are whyintheworldaretheyspraying.com. He features prominently in that film, and please pick up that DVD or donate to support their work. And also geoengineeringwatch.org has an astounding amount of information, so please check that out as well. And of course, my website is endthelie.com, and you are listening to us on ucy.tv. We will be back in moments. Stick with us.
We're ending the lie at UCY. UCY.tv. For the people, by the people.
and welcome back to the second hour of this exciting episode of End the Lie Radio. I am your host, Madison Rupert, and of course my website is endthelie.com, and you can check us out on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, etc. by scrolling down to the very bottom of the page and clicking the icons there. And we have been talking with Dane Wigington. He features prominently in Why in the World Are They Spraying, and you can check that out at whyintheworldaretheyspraying.com. We highly recommend you pick up that DVD and make tons of copies to hand out to friends and family. And he's also affiliated with GeoEngineeringWatch.org, which keeps tabs on these issues surrounding geoengineering, especially stratospheric aerosol geoengineering, and provides a ton of documentation and some disturbing facts that are behind this really troubling development that we've seen over the past few decades that we know is geoengineering. But Dane, if you could tell us a little bit about what chemicals make up these geoengineering products, and how this actually affects us in our daily lives, and how this is making its way into the food system.
That they believe, because these nanoparticles, that's what we're talking about. And most people don't understand how small a nanoparticle is. The patents call for 10 nanometer aluminum particulates. And these are, something 1/50,000th the width of a human hair. I mean, it's inconceivably small. And when this sort of material is uptaken into your system, Madison, they believe now, from the data or for the testing they've done and the research they've done, that this could cause, and may in fact be causing, linear DNA mutation. The ramifications of that, I am not versed enough in to try to explain, but certainly the term alone should be very alarming for people. So at this point, again, back to what is geoengineering doing to us? Yes, it appears to be being uptaken in everything we eat, with no exceptions, shredding the ozone layer, completely thwarting the Earth's hydrological cycle, causing immense drought around the globe, along with deluge in other places, poisoning the soils, as we mentioned, contaminating our air. Inhaled aluminum is much, much more damaging to the organism, to our bodies, than ingested aluminum. And again, we've had internationally recognized and award-winning neuroscientists like Russell Blaylock speaking to this on the record. And people can look up, again, everything I'm saying. Look up Dr. Russell Blaylock and geoengineering, and you can find his statements that these particles pass right through the blood-brain barrier. They're so small they enter right through the lung lining, straight into the bloodstream, where they adhere to cell receptors in your body. So again, the web of life from the sky to the ground is being virtually decimated by these programs from top to bottom. So back to the Norwegian study. Now we know from that, and this is posted on GeoEngineering Watch as well, with a lot of hard data that it's difficult to comprehend for most, but it's summarized. There's nothing we are eating now that's not contaminated, period.
And is this something that operates on the principle of bioaccumulation, where it just continues to build up more and more and more as it goes up and down, as it were, the food chain from being in grass to beef and then into our systems? Is this something that gets worse the higher it goes up on the food chain? And is this something that we're going to see the effects of this in our lifetime? What is the time scale of this? I know you answered this in the last episode, and by the way, everyone, that's episode 30, which you can find over on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/end the lie. If you just search Dane, it'll come up right there, and you can check out the other information that we covered. But what exactly are we talking about in terms of timeline here with seeing the effects of this?
The effects are already radically manifesting themselves. You have respiratory mortality in the continental U.S. from 2005 to 2010. Respiratory mortality went from 8th on the list of mortality to 3rd. No explanation. Now, we're hearing that may be moving close to the first cause of mortality, and that's trying to be hidden by the CDC. Center for Disease Control. We don't know that for sure yet, but we are hearing that, and certainly it was publicized and went from 8th to 3rd. This is a monumental increase with no explanations. We know ADD, Alzheimer's, autism, all going off the charts. Fungal sinusitis. Again, these particulates are a platform for fungal proliferation. Fungal diseases and ailments are going off the charts. Fungal sinusitis epidemic in the continental U.S. now. According to the Mayo Clinic, some 50 million people a year are diagnosed. Many more are thought to have this. We are absolutely being sickened by the day, period. It is bioaccumulative, as you stated. And to put this into context for people, we are today, according to 9 out of 10 biologists interviewed, we are in the 6th mass extinction on planet Earth. The current extinction rate today is 1,000 times natural variability. That's 100,000% of normal. And that's a conservative figure. 70 to 80% of that is fungally related. These dots are all connected. And people who have not seen the signs of the walls closing in on us will see that very soon. There's no hiding for this much longer. We are seeing literally implosion in the biosphere from insects, in the case of Northern California, Madison, as measured by a U.S. Forest Service biologist who's done this for 3.5 decades, decrease in aquatic insect life of 95% over the course of 7-8 years. That's a virtual crash. Can't hide this stuff for very long, and the media is doing everything they can to hide it. But again, it's in everything we eat, everything we consume, everything we breathe. When you have 20% of the globe encased in these particulates, that's the term global dimming. Again, I want people to research what I'm speaking about. Global dimming. 20% of the sun's direct rays are no longer reaching the surface of the planet. This, again, a result of geoengineering. So all Earth's life support systems are being decimated from top to bottom.
And correct me if I'm wrong here, but one of the implications of that is a reduced ability to deal with this type of pollutant. So we're talking about something that just a problem that kind of exacerbates itself in an endless feedback loop, just making it worse and worse and worse. And then to top it off, they seem to be their answer is doing the same type of thing that is partially responsible for the problem in the first place. So I mean, what are we talking about here in terms of realistic solutions? If I mean, how can we actually address this? Obviously, more geoengineering is not the answer. So how can someone like you or I go about, for instance, trying to cut out? I mean, is it really to the point where it is so embedded in our food system that no matter what, you're going to be exposed to these toxins? Or what? I mean, what can we do in our daily lives? Because obviously we can't get up there and say, hey, stop flying around in these planes and geoengineering. That's just not realistic at this point. So what can we do?
I mean, that's the most important question of all, isn't it? I mean, we've gone over a lot of doom and gloom, and we certainly are very much in a corner, all of us. But there's much we can do. To start with, we have to try to raise awareness on this issue to stop the constant contamination. That can only happen by a grassroots awareness to a point where everyone knows in the population, which includes military families. A lot of good people in the military, we salute their service, but we beg them to investigate this issue because participation in this issue is to participate in their own death in the end. So we hope to raise awareness to the point at a grassroots level where everybody knows, including military families, so that hopefully they will refuse to participate and bring these programs to a halt, because the first order in getting healthy is to stop the constant exposure and constant contamination. So that's something we can go over in more detail in a minute. But as far as what we can do, these particulates, again, are bioaccumulative. So it's important to chelate constantly. There are people can look this up online, and we have some data on it on our site. But chelating elements like even cilantro is thought to be good at chelating metals. the blue-green algae. It's important to have a constant chelation going on because these metals are being uptaken by each and every one of us, period. There's absolutely no denying that. It's in the air. It's in every single test. It's absolutely there, and we're absolutely breathing it. Now, it's important also, again, back to stopping the continued contamination, Madison. These are highly reactive metals, in case of aluminum especially. Aluminum, although it's very abundant, and you'll hear this sort of denial. When you talk about aluminum in the rain, people, the disinformation people will say, well, aluminum's 8% of the Earth's crust. It should be everywhere. No, that's a lie. That's an absolute lie. It is 8% of the Earth's crust, but it does not exist in the environment in free form. Period. It's bonded to other elements because it's highly reactive. So back to what we can do, if we could stop the spraying, all the contamination that's in the ground, a majority of it would, probably in short order, we can only guess, we've never been through this scenario, but should chelate and bond to other elements, which would stop it from being uptaken into our food, probably in fairly short order. So it's a matter of stopping the constant ongoing contamination. That's imperative. Now, it's imperative, again, to chelate, as I mentioned before. And any health food store can go over an array of things to help people chelate constantly to keep these metals from building up too much in their systems, and that also is important.
Well, I definitely want to get into this a little more because I do think it is important to talk about what we can do in order to at least mitigate these problems. But it's funny, the buzzword mitigate is something I think I see very, very constantly, and you would probably agree as well when we're talking about global climate change. A lot of times they're talking about geoengineering as a way to mitigate these problems. Why don't you speak to the programs that are being promoted and how I mean, are they pursuing public support of these programs, or do they not even care? This is a conversation that's essentially restricted to the geoengineering community and so on. Where exactly is this conversation taking place, and is the public being included in this conversation, or is it something where they don't even care what we think about it? They're just going to go and do whatever, regardless of how much we might dislike it?
I think the latter is the case now. They tested the water for public reception at the AAAS conference in San Diego in 2010, where the world's most recognized geoengineering scientist, David Keith, was made to say on the record, and this people can see this on What in the World Are They Spraying? David Keith says on the record, when he is pinned down and made to answer a question, has there been any study done whatsoever on human health effects, soil toxicity, etc.? After trying to dodge the question, he is finally forced to answer, no. We've done no such studies. Could terrible things happen tomorrow? We don't know. Now, what kind of response is that from someone who's using the atmosphere as a toxic physics lab? I mean, it shows the cavalierness with which these guys operate. So public reception is nil. They know that now. I think that was a way to test the water. And now they're just pressing on. And there was no more press allowed in any other geoengineering conference after that time. That was the first, last, and only. So they perhaps tested the water then, Madison, but now it's just simply back to business as usual. Don't mention it. Nobody talks about it. You have weather people that try to get on the major weather forecasters that just try to say, this is normal, it's natural. I saw Wake Up with Al Roker on Weather Channel show a picture someone sent in of a virtual grid pattern in the sky, and he tried to say, he said, isn't Mother Nature miraculous, as if this was some natural occurrence. It would be comical if it wasn't so dire that these guys lie their teeth off because they just want to go to work at 8 and come home at 5, and they'll say whatever they're told to say. And I personally know scientists with USDA, Fish and Game in California, who know this is going on and are afraid to admit it. I met with NOAA scientists about 3 months ago, who, when they knew they were off the record, admitted to me that they absolutely know this is going on and they're, quote, alarmed as hell, but they can't speak out. There's no First Amendment protection for government employees. And again, for people that doubt this is going on, and simply there is no debate, it is, but I would encourage them to look at geoengineeringwatch.org and on the search engine there to look up U.S. 1966 U.S. document outlining weather modification. Again, it's 80 pages long. Even that far back, it outlined budgets in the hundreds of millions, involvement of National Academy of Sciences, involved contractors, universities, discussed regulating bodies, international impact, experiments over oceans, involvement of ally countries, NASA panels on weather modification. It discussed legal and social ramifications, species disruptions, biological consequences, expansion of these programs, went over executive orders. This is a memo from the Executive Office of the President. I mean, this data is absolutely undeniable. And it's, anybody who wants to deny these programs are going on is just simply doesn't want to know the truth. So, again, this issue, the gravity of this issue, Madison, can't be overstated, and we need everybody to carry this torch. We need absolutely everybody to help spread awareness on this issue because all of our futures depend on it, period.
Yes, and unfortunately, that is not an overstatement in the slightest. We are talking about something that is really the likes of which have never been seen before. But before we get into a little bit more of the solutions here, I want to talk about some of the clear conclusions that can be drawn from the paleoclimatic data and just really how serious this is. If you can speak to that a little bit to really make it clear to people, what we're facing here is we're not just talking about, dirtying up the skies with these ugly chemtrails, so to speak, in the sky and, ruining sunsets and stuff like that. But we're talking about something much more serious. And what exactly are we facing here?
That's a very good question, and let me try to put that into context. When previous events of this magnitude have happened, and even with methane reservoirs that were thought to be smaller than the one that is now releasing, but even then, the best paleoclimatic data we have, again, is going back to the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum 55 million years ago. There was a dead zone in the center part of the planet from about 30 degrees south to 30 degrees north. In this dead zone, in the tropics, land surface temperatures were thought to be something in the range of 140 degrees. Nothing lives at that temperature. Ocean temperatures in that region were thought to be something on the order of 105 degrees. Nothing lives in the ocean at that kind of temperature. That's why we have global mass extinction. So again, the ramifications here are absolutely cataclysmic. And as alarmist as this might sound to many of the listeners, I only ask that they watch over the coming months and going into next year. Temperatures, weather anomalies. I don't think there'll be much hiding this for very much longer. And if people research this issue, if they research Arctic methane emergency, if they start doing some of their own investigation, they will find credibility to what I'm saying. So back to your original question, to put this into context of the magnitude of what we face an issue that is very difficult to get your arms around, and large portions of the planet likely being uninhabitable. And that was the case when we did not have all the additional damage the human race has done to the planet. We did not have geoengineering going on, shredding the ozone layer. We did not have poison, toxic rain falling on us, poisoning the boreal forests, stopping them from trying to counteract some of this methane that's going on. So again, we have a lot of additional factors that are negative in this equation, in addition to the methane that's been released, and some of those factors were part of the cause of the release to begin with. So we face a dire situation, Madison, now that can't be turned off. But back to geoengineering, why I have focused all my effort and energies on this issue, because all available data indicates if this issue is not brought to light and brought to a halt, that I feel from the data that we have for the long run, I feel we have little to no chance. I feel the data supports that, and you will find scientific consensus to support that also. I mean, it's there. So geoengineering is not just an environmental issue. It is the issue. It is the issue on which our future literally rests at this point. And we have caused things now that can't be turned off. But if we don't stop doing what helped to cause that, I think our chances are almost nil.
Dane, correct me if I'm wrong here, but when we're talking about geoengineering, we're not just talking about manipulation of the atmosphere, correct?
You're correct.
Because I actually came across an article not too long ago. It was actually published on October 15th in The Guardian, which of course is out of the UK, and it's called World's Biggest Geoengineering Experiment Violates UN Rules. Controversial U.S. businessman's iron fertilization off west coast of Canada contravenes 2 U.S. conventions. Have you heard anything about this and iron fertilization in general?
Absolutely, and I know of that event. And again, this is just one more means the media tries to hide what's happening in the skies above us by insinuating that this is perhaps the only geoengineering event that has occurred while we ignore what's happening above us. Iron fertilization of the ocean is every bit as insane as stratospheric aerosol geoengineering, which is what's happening in our skies. When they fill the ocean with iron oxide, it does indeed cause an algae bloom, which does indeed sequester carbon, pulls carbon out of the atmosphere and absorbs it into the ocean. But nothing comes without a cost. There is always a cost. The cost is always much more horrific than any potential gain. In the case of the oceans, yes, it causes a massive carbon absorption, but what does it do to the ocean? It sucks the oxygen out of the ocean, causes a massive hypoxic zone, which amounts to a massive dead zone in the ocean. So how short-sighted is it to say, yeah, we pulled some carbon out of the atmosphere at the cost of causing a massive dead zone in the ocean? What was gained in that? At this point, we have 400 dead zones in the oceans around the globe. Again, we have fish stocks collapsing. The largest dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is now thought to be, I think, something in the order of 10,000 square miles. I mean, this is just insanity, unbridled insanity from top to bottom. So, yes, there are other aspects of geoengineering. And on that note, Madison, the media tries to distract people with quote-unquote geoengineering experiments as if they're just beginning to tinker with this. And they'll use these very fringe experiments like suspending a hose from the ground from a balloon into the atmosphere to pump particulates out, or space mirrors. They use these completely fringe ideas, and they're red herrings to just simply take people's eye off the fact that the elephant in the room is stratospheric aerosol geoengineering, which is disbursement of these particulates from aircraft. We see it with our own eyes every day. So the media is doing everything it can to keep people's head in the sand, and as are all the weather forecasting agencies. I mean, it's difficult to get your arms around the size of this web, but it's massive indeed. And all our futures really, truly, if one looks at the data, rely on stopping these programs. And in between now and when they stop, people should remember that every breath they take is laden with these toxic metal and chemical particulates, and it is doing damage day in, day out to each and every one of us.
Yeah, and when you mention that, it makes complete sense. If people are looking out for, giant space mirrors or all of these ridiculous ideas, they're not going to be paying attention to the quite obvious signs of geoengineering or stratospheric geoengineering occurring currently. And, it's funny, what you were saying is almost word for word echoed by an oceanographer I'm probably going to butcher this, this, but Dalhousie University in Canada, which is a research university, he says, quote, some possible effects such as deep water oxygen depletion and alteration of distant food webs should rule out ocean manipulation. History is full of examples of ecological manipulations that backfired, unquote. And I think we could take that and just replace the mentions of ocean with atmosphere, and it would be just as applicable. Would you agree with that?
It's absolutely, indisputably the case. I live in what was 10 years ago an extremely vibrant area of forest in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, so many birds on any given spring or summer day that in the forest it sounded like you're in the tiki room at Disneyland where all the birds are singing. And I mean, dozens of species, tremendous populations, caterpillars everywhere in the spring, dragonflies. It is virtually silent in the forest now. We haven't seen a caterpillar for several years. We see maybe 1 or 2% of the dragonflies we saw before. You rarely see or hear a bird. I mean, it is absolutely cataclysmic here, and this has happened in 10 years. We see trees dead and dying all over, and this is accelerating. It's accelerating rapidly. Sudden oak death, many have heard of this in California. It has increased tenfold in the last year or two. Tenfold, that's 1,000% increase. This ball is gaining momentum at astronomical speed. The ecosystem cannot take this constant bombardment of toxic particulates any longer. And in addition to this, again, we have the lack of rainfall. We have a changed rainfall pH. When they're spraying heavily, the rainfall pH is up 6.8, something like that, instead of 5.6. It's changed soil pHs in our region. We know this for a fact. We're not speculating. I have the original USDA soil pH studies for Shasta and Siskiyou counties. These are very expensive and comprehensive, large manuals. It has changed 10 to 12 times toward alkaline in only 7 to 8 years. We are not speculating on this stuff. Light photosynthesis. Now we have 20% of the sun's light being blocked, Madison, and the light wavelength that's coming through these particulates is altered. We don't know what that does to photosynthesis. We have no idea. There's no study on anything like that. So, I mean, we can't even begin to quantify the total decimation being caused by these programs. So, yes, I would agree with what the scientists said about the iron fertilization. That's exactly my conclusion based on my study. And the case is much, much worse with the atmosphere. You are correct.
Wow, and I just want to say anecdotally, I have noticed the exact same thing. I was born and raised here in Southern California, and it used to be the case that you always hear birds, even in the city. You always hear birds. You always see caterpillars, snails. There's little wildlife everywhere. It's just gone now. And another experience out in the East Coast in New York, I was out there on vacation not too long ago, and in these deep forests, very lush, it was dead silent. I mean, dead silent. Not a single bird, and that is not normal. That is not normal, folks. You always hear some kind of wildlife, see wildlife. When it's just gone like that, I think that's a very strong sign that something very serious is going on here. Dane, if you could, what are we going to expect to see within, say, from the end of 2012 here to 2013? If they continue with business as usual, what, in your opinion, effects can we see other than obviously these things that we've both noticed, and I'm sure many of the listeners in the chat room will be agreeing? I mean, we just see the complete lack of wildlife here. I used to go hiking and stuff. You always hear wildlife, birds, whatever it may be, little creatures in the bushes and stuff like that. It's just, it's dead when you go out there. And it's scary to me. But what can we see, or expect to see rather, in the coming year, so long as is this stratospheric geoengineering continues as it has in the past?
First, I want to say that, again, when people hear your observations and mine, it's important to understand that we are not guessing. This is not our imagination. When we have accepted figures of current species extinction rate of 1,000 times natural variability, 1,000 times normal, it is not our imagination that forest is silent. It is absolutely silent. And again, that figure is thought to be conservative. So this die-off is very, very real. One more thing I want to mention, too, that people might consider. They think if this was going on, some agency would tell them. The EPA would tell them. California Air Quality would tell them. But that is simply naiveness. These agencies are rigged from bottom to top. I have been in high-level EPA meetings in Sacramento. I was in one that was arranged by a congressional rep. Closed-door meeting, 5 high-level EPA people there. I was told to my face, the system is rigged. That, I mean, this is not the words they use, but I was told that they are told to test for combustion particulates only. The rest of the sample goes out the window. What that means is you can't find what you're told not to look for. They quit testing for aluminum and water in the state of California in 2002. Why is that? California Energy Commission. I spoke in front of the California Energy Commission in Sacramento 2 years ago. They knew they're losing 20% or more of their rainfall from, quote, particulates of unknown origin. And the state of California knows where all particulates are coming from. It's not coming from China. They already did a study on that. And so they knew. They were presented with geoengineering data then. They knew where these particulates are coming from, but they can't say anything because the state of California is flat broke. They have their tin cup out to the Fed every year for a $30 billion infusion to keep the state's head above water. It's back to the money again, Madison. So for people who wonder how these programs can go on, how there can be such a massive contamination, nobody knows, that's how. Back to your question as to what we can expect. We can expect temperatures to continually warm up from what they should be, far above normal temperatures. Nighttime lows are rising twice as fast as daytime highs. Methane is filling the upper atmosphere. We see it on satellite methane imagery. It's filling the mesosphere. Noctilucent clouds are being seen around the globe in places never before seen. We believe this is a result of the methane. There's, scientific consensus on that. So we can expect to see protracted warming, less and less snow, the snow that does fall being ice nucleated, heavy wet snow. As winter goes on, you will see temperatures drop. I mean, we're still in winter, and this event has not completely unfolded yet. You will definitely see cooler temperatures, and temperatures that are probably, in many cases, orchestrated with jet stream movement. That's something HARP can do. We didn't mention HARP. The ionosphere heaters can and do manipulate the jet stream. So when the jet stream is manipulated to take a very sharp dive into the states, and there's some ice nucleation, chemical process, and cold air brought down with it, we'll see some low temps. But what you'll see is radical temperature fluctuation. We see this every day now. Chicago yesterday was, I believe, 65. Today's high was 32. These are radical fluctuations. Minneapolis, Minnesota, I believe, was in the mid-60s today and expected to go down to something like 29 degrees today or tomorrow. These are huge fluctuations, and that temperature will rebound right back up when that jet stream is no longer over them and they're no longer part of a geoengineering operation. So we'll see radical temperature fluctuations. We're going to see more and more spray in the skies, the hazy skies, and don't always look for a long linear trail. When people need to understand, when they see cobweb-looking clouds, dingy-looking sky, upper-level haze that doesn't look like a cloud, looks more like smoke, that's spray. So we'll see hazier skies, less and less wildlife, increased temperatures, increased UV, the intensity of the sun on our faces. And again, I believe within the next 5 to 6 months, something will be announced because there will be no more hiding this any longer. I believe that, I don't know what they'll spring on us at that time. Can't pretend to know that, but I believe the demise of the wildlife we see in Madison and our what we knew to be natural weather is going to be very rapid and very hard to ignore for much longer.
But we're guaranteed to see some kind of explanation that will not involve what is actually going on, correct? So do you think it'll be something maybe perhaps about climate change, and then they'll say, oh, all we have to do is shut down XYZ coal plant, or we need to push through cap and trade laws, or something like that? It'll be a phony cause with a phony solution that won't actually address the problem. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
I think that's what they've been doing, and I think we're well past that. I think what will likely come now is some sort of admission to the gravity of what's happening with the climate. But I think at that point they will try, perhaps, to sell geoengineering to the population as a cure that must be undertaken. Again, this is being called for right now by the Arctic Methane Emergency Group, a group of frontline scientists that are calling for, quote, emergency wartime scale geoengineering to avert planetary catastrophe. So they're calling for this. It's either an attempt to legitimize what's going on already, or these scientists live in a deep, dark cave somewhere and don't know this has been going on for this long. And again, in the scientific community as a whole, with few exceptions, the apathy or unwillingness to admit to glaring truths is absolutely mind-numbing. I mean, I look, most scientists that I have studied or know, or you look at all sorts of data, they would have to watch a house burn to the ground and sift through the ashes for 10 years to say, yeah, that was a fire. By then it's too late. And that's exactly what we face now. So I think they will try to sell it to us, Madison, as a must-do, last-ditch effort to avert planetary catastrophe. And this is what people must understand. The geoengineering has been going on for 6+ decades and is based on all available data, likely the single biggest causal factor for these planetary feedback cataclysmic climate loops being triggered to begin with. It is not a cure, it is a curse, period.
Wow, well, it sounds like it would be a really great way to sell these programs that obviously, as you mentioned, have been going on already. It seems like it would be a great way to get people to suddenly say, "Oh, yeah, we'll jump on board with this, continue doing this, or increase it dramatically, and we'll give the thumbs up to that, because so long as enough scientists with enough PhDs and shiny enough suits get on enough, television news programs, people will buy it up. I mean, it's really disturbing to see the things that people will agree to, so long as an authority figure gets up there and tells them what they need. And personally, that sounds to me like something that is not only likely, but something that would be successful. As disturbing as that is, do you agree that you think a lot of people would jump on board with this, so long as if enough scientists get together, enough prestigious industry groups or whatever it may be, and say, you know what, we need to engage in massive geoengineering, the likes of which has never been imagined, in order to avert total cataclysm? Do you think if it's phrased like that with the...
I think so. I think it will be phrased like that, and I think your assessment of people
board.
I think the assessment of people buying that is likely, if those people have not already been reached with data, so that they understand what's going on before they're sold the big lie. And again, one thing we know for certain about governments lie. We see with from WMD in Iraq, the big lie. Agent Orange, the big lie that was denied forever. 9/11 being that site being safe to go into, which we knew was the government knew was anything but they lied. The Macondo well in the Gulf, how long do they lie about that? NASA on the spraying simply has a sheet that says it's not happening. So there's no data, there's no explanation. They just say it's a hoax. Well, in relation to the geoengineering, so we know governments lie, period, and there is no bigger lie than the geoengineering issue. So as far as it having any potential for good, so it's important we reach people in the meantime with data so that they already know what's happening, and we can each participate in that. That's something that involves all of us, Madison. And if people from their own home computer located groups, organizations, and individuals that would care if they only knew, and sent them a credible article or two, a source for more data, better yet, a copy of Michael Murphy's film, What in the World Are They Spraying? Or Why in the World Are They Spraying? His newest film. We all must try to help disseminate data. And giving people hard data is a lot better than giving them a rant and sending up their defenses.
That's a phenomenal point, and that's something I really appreciate about that film. Is it's not there, screaming at you, hitting you over the head or anything like that. It's presenting the information, and the conclusion you come to is essentially the only one that you can, without just bending reality and engaging in some insanely illogical thinking. And that conclusion is that this is going on, and it is extremely dangerous, and hopefully people will take that to heart and help spread this information as much as possible. What I really appreciate about the work that you guys are doing is that you do allow people to make the copies of the DVD and pass it out. Clearly, this is not creating a culture of fear in order to market a product. And I think, unfortunately, we're seeing that a lot now when we're facing these problems. It seems like a lot of people are out there to capitalize on the problems. But you mentioned the government in 9/11 talking about the air. I think that is a phenomenal point, and one that I personally want to emphasize. For those out there who say, the government cares about us, they would never do something like this. Look at what they did on 9/11. We're talking about first responders. We're talking about volunteers who put their life on the line to dig through rubble, to go crawling under rubble to try and save people's lives. The EPA stood there and lied and said, oh, you guys don't need respirators. You guys don't need any kind of protection whatsoever. Just go ahead and do it. And then they all got, these horrific diseases. And then the government stood there and refused to even give them any health coverage to help them after they were lied to, and essentially, their lives were endangered even further by the government. So do you think that is a great example to point to those people who still have this kind of blind trust in the government?
Absolutely a great example, and again, it's a very verifiable example. And again, if we go back in history, we have other examples. Agent Orange, how long was that lied about? Gulf War syndrome, which is thought to be a consequence of the government's use of depleted uranium ammunition with our own troops being exposed. I think there's more than enough data, Madison, to say absolutely conclusively those in power don't give a damn about the people at large. They don't, nor their own troops, nor the U.S. citizens, anybody else. And to spread the word on this issue is to go back to something you said earlier. Michael Murphy's film, you mentioned this is not about capitalizing on this alarmism. That could not be more true. Michael Murphy is the most selfless person I've ever known. This is his film. This is his work. I am an interview in it, but this is his mission in life, and he could not live more frugally than he does. He barely is keeping his head above the waterline, trying to keep his work going. He lives in the most modest means a human can live at, and I won't go into detail, but you couldn't live more modestly than he lives. He's almost on a park bench at night, okay? And people need to understand this. Without them helping this work, his work cannot continue. He very unselfishly allowed duplication of those DVDs because this is his mission. It's the cause that matters to him, but he does need enough to eat and get from point A to point B to get his work done. If people buy a single commercial copy, they can make as many copies as they want, but it's imperative that they help his effort. And there is no profit made on any of this. It's simply all for the cause, period. So I want to plead with people to try to assist Michael in his efforts with what he's done here. He's done a hero's work, and we should support him.
Indeed, and above all, the information is vitally important, and it's presented in a way that is not overwhelming to the viewer. When I first saw What in the World Are They Spraying, my impression of geoengineering, or as I knew it at the time solely as chemtrails, was that it's absolute craziness. It was something that crazy people ramble on about. They think it's sprayed in the air so they can control your mind, or it's actually aliens, or who knows. It's all these wild, speculative, often very crazy sounding ideas. But when the facts are presented, and the latest one, Why in the World Are They Spraying, features a lot of footage, as you mentioned, of the first and last of these open conferences, and it's very clear why they're no longer going to allow media into these types of conferences. It is absolutely damning, and it is very shocking and disturbing. I will not pull any punches in that regard. When you're dealing with this information and the facts involved, it can become very overwhelming because it seems as though this is something that is totally out of control, and there's absolutely nothing you can do. So to round out the show a little bit, why don't we talk about some of the things that you can do, even if they are relatively minor, because as we said earlier, you can't really go up in the air and stop these planes from spraying, essentially. It's not like in deforestation efforts, you can't really chain yourself to a tree. You can't really chain yourself to the sky and say, hey, don't spray here. But I think there are some steps that we can take, and you mentioned some of them, but are there also steps we can take in terms of growing our own food? Would perhaps, growing in a controlled indoor environment help? And what other steps can we take?
These particulates, again, are so small that they migrate everywhere. We have tested in crawl spaces below homes that have never been exposed to direct sky. Same amount of contamination. They migrate everywhere. That's how small they are. So it's hard to protect against that. But what we can do is this. Everybody can make a difference. If a person, for example, Michael Murphy's tape, we feel is the single, I feel, and I have absolutely not dime one of any interest in this. And Michael's not making penny one either. He's just keeping his head above the ground. But his tape is the single best tool because it's the most comprehensive, and a picture's worth 1,000 words. So that tool, again, you can make as many copies as you want if you have a tape. By passing that out, if a person introduced this subject to 2 others at the beginning of 30 days, and those 2 introduced it to 2 more on the second day, and so on for 30 days. That's 5.5 million people, Madison, at the end of 30 days. People think my math is wrong, but it's not. If we each just made it a mission to introduce this to 2 more, and them to 2 more, and so on down the line, it would not be very long at all before the entire population would know this is going on. And again, I reiterate, if the entire population knows, that means military families will know. They'll know what their sons or daughters are involved with, their sons and daughters that don't realize what they're involved with. And we would hope once they do realize that they'll refuse to participate. And I personally spoke to a KC-135 pilot that didn't know what he was doing flying around up there. And when he went back to ask questions, the last time I heard he was medicated behind a desk. That's what they do when you ask questions. So, again, I don't think for a minute that the people involved with these programs, our military brothers and sisters, know at all what they're participating in. But it's important they know. They need to know, and we can all help them know. We can all make a difference. We are not helpless. We are absolutely not helpless. If each of us made it a mission to introduce this subject to others around us with credible data. The best tool, again, is Michael's film, Why in the World Are They Spraying? It would not be much time at all before we would have this out in the open, and hopefully then to a stop once enough people know what's going on. And it depends on all of us to reach this place of awareness. It depends on each and every one of us.
Yes, and it is exponential growth, as you mentioned. When you are spreading this type of information, it really does grow at an exponential rate. And like you said, I find it honestly hard to believe or hard to imagine that, say, someone flying one of these planes without knowing, having any idea what they're doing, because we are talking about compartmentalization here. They don't tell you what you're up to, and that's always the case in the military. You just do what you're told, and you don't ask questions, and then that's the end of it. But if people were aware of what they were engaging in, I mean, there are so many people in the military who have children, who expect grandchildren. They have brothers and sisters, parents, grandparents, whatever it may be. I really find it hard to imagine that they would continue doing this, knowing what they're doing, not only to themselves, but to their family, to their loved ones, to their friends. I mean, of course, there is always a small segment of the population, as we mentioned earlier, that are really total sociopaths or psychopaths, as they used to be called more often, where they really have no regard for the suffering of others. But I can't imagine that, say that the vast majority of the military is actually made up of sociopaths. It's just, statistically speaking, not possible. So would you agree in that regard that if they are made aware of the impact of what they're engaging in, they would think twice before signing up for these types of programs?
Yes, and that is the goal. And this is, a final note on this is that the planet must be allowed to respond on its own. Our best hope lies in allowing the planet to react to the damage that's been done to it on its own. And right now, that is being completely hampered from top to bottom. There will be very violent weather. The spraying tends to dumb down the weather. We see this massive spraying off the Pacific Northwest coast and the Eastern Pacific Ocean, and that kills most of the storm cyclonic rotation. So you get these massive 3,000-4,000 mile long drifting globs of toxic cloud cover with not much coming out of it. There will be violent weather when they stop these programs, but that is the planet responding to damage done. More rain that's laden with carbon that will invigorate the forest floor instead of decimating it. We have that's the planet's method for rejuvenating ozone layer, that the stronger storms. So again, the planet must be allowed to respond, Madison. Obviously, for man to think he could do this without consequence is insanity beyond measure. So yes, people are not powerless. We are not helpless in this situation. We can all help spread the word, and that is the goal, to allow the planet to respond without these programs. That is our greatest hope, and that's what we all should be working for.
I have a question in terms of monitoring. Are there any satellite imagery services or anything like that where we can actually look and see this kind of spraying, where it's occurring mostly, or anything like that? Or are we reliant on NOAA and these other clearly compromised agencies, as we discussed earlier? Or, what options are there in that regard? We
are reliant on them, but typically their images do show the aerosol spraying. Even on the Weather Channel, most of their satellite imagery, when it shows the cloud movement, not just the rain cells, the spraying is visible, not the individual lines. But whenever you see massive areas of rainless cloud being broadcast out in front of a rain cell, they're spraying that cell, period. We do post, if people go to geoengineeringwatch.org, we do locate these satellite images and post them. They are there, visible in the upper left-hand corner. And we post new images regularly. We are losing some sites. We believe there is an ever-quickening effort to diminished data, diminished available data. We see this all the time. Things that they're disappearing from the website. It's an effort to further mask the situation. But we do try to locate satellite imagery constantly, and we post it on our site, Madison, geoengineeringwatch.org. People can see updated satellite imagery there of aerosol spraying where the trails are clearly visible.
And the amount of footage provided in your documentaries that you participated in is absolutely shocking. And a lot of the footage was actually accompanying the last time you were with us. It was episode 30. If you look that up on YouTube, you can see some of these images, and it is just undeniable when you're looking at it like that. It's just impossible to continue to believe that they're pure contrails or condensation trails. What is your take on, have you been keeping up at all with some of the supposed bases and specific contractors? I've heard of one, Evergreen. Are you familiar with that? And if not, are you familiar with any of the companies directly involved other than the ones that we've mentioned already?
Evergreen Aviation appears to be a major geoengineering player. There appears to be commercial carriers involved. I'm not implicating commercial pilots or personnel. Project Cloverleaf, people can look up online that there is data out there still on that. It appears to be the outline of keeping non-profitable commercial routes in the air for additional aircraft for payload disbursements. There's enough data around that program to indicate it probably was real, and indeed commercial aircraft have been identified from the ground with GPS tracking leaving particulate trails, clearly spraying. So again, not implicating commercial pilots up in their cockpit pushing buttons, not at all. These mechanisms appear to be centrally controlled, GPS, and so I'm simply saying those aircraft appear to be being used. Evergreen Aviation, people can look up Evergreen Aviation weather modification. They can see photos of Evergreen's 747 super tankers openly being advertised for, quote, weather modification. These programs are the the crime in plain sight that people just simply haven't looked at and looked for. So we believe there's a lot of players involved, a lot of layers to this onion, Madison, a lot of purposes they're doing this for. Again, we have Monsanto engineering their aluminum and drought-resistant corn that is just in time for our aluminum-poisoned and drought-stricken soils. Many players appear to be involved with this, some just capitalizing off these programs, others directly involved. So, again, this is a very complex situation, but the bottom line is we are all being sprayed like rats. The planet is being decimated. If these programs don't stop, we are all on board the Titanic. And we have to stop these programs if we are to have anything left to salvage, period.
Well, I think that's a phenomenal way to wrap up this episode of End the Lie Radio. And once again, we've been talking with Dane Wigington, and please, everyone, purchase Why in the World Are They Spraying? WhyInTheWorldAreTheySpraying.com, and you can get one of the DVDs there and copy unlimited copies, hand them out to friends, family, coworkers, whoever it may be, because as we said before, the only way truly that we can fight back against this is exponential information growth, and that really will happen if people do spread this information. And if you missed a single minute of this, you're going to want to go back and listen to all of it here at ucy.tv. And until next week, I'm your host, Madison Rupert, and of course my website is endthelie.com. And oh yes, geoengineeringwatch.org is the absolute best website to keep abreast of these issues and come to your own conclusions, and then that which is the most obvious and clear, and that is this is real, this is increasing, and the danger is really cataclysmic, apocalyptic, all of the hyperbolic words you can imagine. It really isn't exaggeration here, folks. But until next time, thank you so much for listening. And Dane, thank you so much for coming back on. We're going to definitely have to have you again in the future. Hopefully, we'll be able to stop this before it gets much worse. But the only way we can do that is through the spread of information, everyone. Why in the world are they spraying.com, geoengineeringwatch.org, and of course my website, andthelie.com. Thank you so much for listening, everyone.
UCY.TV. The future is in your hands.